You were too humble. That's the truth. You kept shrinking yourself to keep the peace. You stayed quiet when you should have spoken up. You forgave too quickly. You gave too much, and you did it thinking it was the right thing. But sometimes being too humble is the very thing that holds you back from becoming who you are meant to be. You were trained to believe that ego is bad, that having pride is dangerous, but without ego, people walk all over you. Without ego, you forget your own worth. Without ego, you stay small. Ego is not arrogance. It is awareness. It is the voice inside you that says, there, enough. The ego protects you when your humility begins to hurt you. It reminds you not to lower your standards just to be accepted. It keeps you from being disrespected twice by the same person. Without ego, you start accepting things that break your spirit. You call it peace, but really it's self-betrayal. And over time, it turns into quiet resentment. You suffer in silence while they carry on like nothing happened. Too much humility blinds you. It makes you tolerate what you would never advise others to accept. You swallow the disrespect. You ignore the red flags. You convince yourself that patience is strength. But that's not strength. That's fear. You're afraid of losing people, afraid of being called selfish, so you stay silent. But that silence costs you your self-worth. Your ego, when balanced, is the most powerful tool you can have because it doesn't let you forget who you are. The ego tells you not to explain yourself to those who are committed to misunderstanding you. It helps you walk away with dignity. It builds a boundary between your peace and their chaos. People say ego is dangerous, but what's more dangerous is not having one. Because when you have no ego, you give people permission to decide your value. You let them define your limits. You let them write your story. And the longer you let that happen, the further you drift from your true self. There is a moment in life when humility must be replaced by clarity, when silence must be replaced by distance, when understanding must be replaced by protection. That moment is when you choose ego not to destroy others, but to rebuild yourself. You don't need to shout. You don't need to prove anything. But you do need to stop letting your silence make others comfortable in disrespecting you. That is the role of ego. To step in when your heart has been ignored for too long. You think you're being kind, but you're teaching them how to treat you. Every time you stay silent when something hurts, you're giving them permission to do it again. Every time you say, oh, it's okay, when it's not, you are training them to walk all over you. The ego stops that pattern. It says, no more. It puts you back in control. And that control doesn't come from fighting them. It comes from protecting you. You need ego to grow. You need ego to evolve. You need ego to remember that your time is valuable, your love is sacred, your energy is limited. Not everyone deserves access. Not everyone deserves answers. Not everyone deserves a second chance. Ego helps you filter. Ego helps you walk away from people who keep you small, from situations that keep you confused, from environments that kill your fire. That's not being selfish. That's being self-aware. You didn't lose anything when you stopped being too humble. You gained yourself. You started seeing the truth. You started feeling the weight of everything you were holding in. You started to breathe again. And that breathe, that's ego taking its place. That's the moment your growth begins. Because now you don't beg to be seen. You don't chase closure. You don't wait for apologies. You rise quietly with purpose, with fire, with strength. You were too humble. But now it's time to have ego. Time to become untouchable. Not in anger, but in control. Time to stop explaining your worth. Time to stop making space for people who would never do the same for you. Time to walk like you own yourself. Speak like you remember your value. Move like you know what you bring. That is ego. And that is the beginning of the real you. They didn't leave because you were weak. They left because you were too silent. You gave them peace, but they wanted chaos. You gave them loyalty, but they wanted control. And they thought your silence meant you had no power. They were wrong. You weren't powerless. You were just patient. You weren't afraid. You were just observing. But now it's time to stop being the observer. Now it's time to step into power. Now it's time to let ego speak. They misunderstood your silence because they don't understand strength that doesn't scream. You didn't react and they thought you didn't feel. You didn't fight back and they thought you accepted it. But silence is not surrender. Silence is control. And ego is what gives that silence a spine. The ego doesn't need to argue. It doesn't need to prove. It walks away. It builds. It elevates. Ego is the voice that whispers, don't respond, rise, dasta. You kept letting things slide, not because you were blind, but because you believed they would change. But people don't change when there are no consequences. They change when they lose access. And when you live without ego, you keep giving people access to your energy even when they don't deserve it. You keep showing up for people who disappear when you need them. You keep giving loyalty to those who only feed off your silence. The ego changes that. It puts a mirror in front of you and asks, why do you keep betraying yourself just to keep them comfortable? It demands that you stop handing out your peace to those who bring only noise. It commands you to walk differently, think differently, and act with precision. Ego doesn't seek validation. Ego is validation. It is knowing who you are without needing them to say it. When people mistake your silence for weakness, that's your cue to evolve. Not to argue, not to beg, but to elevate. You don't need to prove anything to anyone who can't even see you clearly. The ego allows you to create space, not to punish, but to protect, because growth needs distance. And sometimes the best way to heal is to disappear from those who never respected your presence in the first place. They thought they could keep treating you the same because you never pushed back. But that ends now. The moment ego arrives, the cycle ends. The patterns break, the manipulation dies. And what's left is someone they no longer recognize, because you're no longer the version of you who tolerated being misunderstood. You've become something sharper, wiser, calmer, and stronger. And the reason is simple. Ego stepped in and said, protect yourself. This is not about revenge. This is not about pride. This is about restoration. You lost pieces of yourself trying to keep the peace. You broke yourself trying to hold them together. But ego rebuilds. Ego picks up what you forgot you had: your self-worth, your fire, your voice. The moment you embrace it, things begin to shift. Your posture changes. Your energy changes. You stop begging for time, love, and clarity. You become the source of all three. They will feel the shift and they will not understand it. They'll call it cold. They'll call it distant. But you'll know better. It's not coldness. It's clarity. You finally see what your silence cost you. And now the cost is too high. Ego allows you to walk away without anger and without explanation, because some things don't need to be said. They need to be felt. And they will feel your absence louder than they ever heard your words. You don't have to raise your voice to make noise. You don't have to fight to win. Ego doesn't yell, it withdraws, it detaches, it reclaims. It is not here to please, it is here to protect. If your silence was used against you, then let your distance be the answer. Let your absence echo what your voice never could. Let your growth be the thing that shows them what they lost, and never look back. You gave them silence because you thought love meant sacrifice. But now you see the truth. Love without boundaries becomes self-destruction. You cannot keep pouring into people who only take. You cannot keep explaining your worth to those who only listen when it's convenient. Ego puts a stop to all of it. Ego brings you back to yourself. Ego teaches you that your peace is not up for discussion anymore. They thought they had power over you because you didn't resist, but the real power is walking away when they expect you to stay. The real power is leveling up so far they can't even reach you anymore. That's what ego gives you. Not hate, not revenge, just the kind of silence that speaks louder than any argument ever could. The kind of confidence that doesn't ask for anything. It simply moves forward. You were too humble. You were too silent. And they thought you were too weak. But now let the ego rise. Let it walk in first. Let it remind you you don't owe anyone anything that costs your peace. You don't need their approval. You don't need to be understood. All you need is one thing, self-respect. That is what ego brings. That is what builds the new you. Ego is not the enemy. Ego is the reason you get up after being broken. Ego is the force that tells you you deserve better. Not because the world owes you, but because you owe yourself something greater. People confuse ego with arrogance, but arrogance needs an audience. Ego doesn't. Ego is silent. It is internal. It is the unshakable knowing that you no longer accept the version of yourself that tolerates disrespect, confusion, or smallness. Ego is not loud. It's powerful. You've been told that to grow, you must be selfless. You've been told to surrender, to serve, to forgive endlessly. But they didn't tell you this. If you have no ego, you will keep giving from an empty place. If you erase your ego completely, you become a shadow of yourself. You stop fighting for your worth. You tolerate anything that doesn't challenge you. You stay small and call it humility. Real growth needs ego. Without it, you'll never raise your standards. Without it, you'll keep giving second chances to people who only understand comfort, not consequence. Ego sets the line. It says, this is who I am, this is what I need, and this is where I stop giving without return. It's not about pride. It's about survival. It's about making sure you are not consumed by others' chaos. A person without ego apologizes for having needs. A person without an ego explains their value to people who are committed to not seeing it. A person without ego stays in situations that drain them, thinking endurance equals strength. But strength is not in staying. Strength is in knowing when to leave, when to stop, when to protect your soul. Ego gives you that knowledge. When ego is balanced, it becomes your boundary. When ego is pure, it becomes your compass. It points you back to yourself every time the world tries to pull you away. You stop seeking approval. You stop chasing closure. You stop explaining your pain. You learn to let people go. You learn to say no without guilt. You learn to walk alone, not because you're broken, but because you finally remembered who you are. A life without ego is a life where you become a mirror for others' expectations. You'll play the role they give you. You'll lower yourself just to be accepted. But ego resists that. Ego reminds you that you were not born to be liked. You were born to be real. You were not made to please others. You were made to master yourself. Ego is that silent push inside that says, rise higher, go further, don't settle. When someone disrespects you and you forgive instantly, they learn nothing. When someone uses you and you stay quiet, they repeat a pattern. That's what happens when you have no ego. But ego steps in and says, I see what you're doing and I won't allow it again. This isn't hatred. This is clarity. And it's only possible when you stop fearing your own power. Ego is not the absence of love. Ego is the presence of self-love. It's not about being better than others. It's about never being less than yourself. When you build healthy ego, you stop living at the mercy of others. You stop fearing loss because ego doesn't chase. Ego doesn't cling. Ego lets go when the energy no longer matches. It attaches. It elevates. And it never explains itself. Some people will say you've changed. And they'll be right. You no longer shrink. You no longer break your back for those who wouldn't lift a finger for you. You no longer soften and firm your voice for those who only listen when you're screaming. That's what ego does. It removes the mask. It removes the fear. It lets you operate from power, not pain. There comes a time when humility is no longer noble. It's dangerous. When your silence begins to cost your peace, when your empathy begins to drown your identity, that's when ego must lead. Because without ego, you can't protect your mind. You can't protect your energy. You can't protect your path. You'll just keep absorbing pain, calling it growth. That is not growth. That is self-destruction in disguise. So take your ego back, own it, refine it, strengthen it. Use it to build a life that no longer depends on others to validate it. Use it to speak your truth without apology. Use it to set boundaries without guilt, because the moment ego steps in, the world stops controlling you. You become the authority. You become the standard. And that's how transformation begins. You were too humble. But now it's time to have ego, not to attack, not to hurt, but to protect everything you've built in silence, to honor everything you've been through, to make sure you never go back to the version of you that begged for respect. Ego turns survival into strength, pain into power, confusion into clarity, and that is the beginning of your greatness. Ego is not the problem. Weakness is, confusion is, doubt is. But ego is the answer when everything else has failed you. You want to grow, then stop killing your ego, start using it. Ego is the only voice that rises inside you when the world tells you to sit down. Ego is the whisper that says, "Far, you are more than this." And most people ignore it. Most people silence that voice. And that's why they stay stuck, stay lost, stay small. You've been taught that the ego is selfish, that it blocks your spiritual growth, that it must be eliminated. But how can you grow when you have no core? How can you evolve if you keep cutting off the very root that gives you strength? Ego is not the enemy of growth. It is the driver of it. Without ego, you would accept anything. You would lower your standards just to be accepted. You would confuse kindness with weakness and endurance with wisdom. A man with no ego forgets who he is. A woman with no ego forgets what she deserves. That's the truth. Because when you have no ego, you allow the world to define your worth. And the world is blind. It doesn't see you. It sees what it wants to take from you. But ego doesn't let that happen. Ego says, I know what I've been through. I know what I carry. I know what I'm capable of. And I will not be treated like anything less. There is a moment when your silence becomes betrayal. Betrayal of your own self. That's what happens when ego is missing. You begin to swallow every insult. You begin to justify every disappointment. You start telling yourself that suffering is noble, that being quiet is mature. But it's not. Sometimes silence is weakness. Sometimes silence is fear. And ego is the fire that breaks that silence. You must protect yourself, not just physically, emotionally, spiritually, mentally, because no one else will do it for you. And ego is your shield. It is the invisible force that says, "You've hurt me once, but never again. You've used me once, but never again. I am not your option. I am not your second choice. I am my own priority now." That's not arrogance, that's awakening. You need ego to walk away. You need ego to stop apologizing for having needs. You need ego to look at someone who doesn't value you and say, "I don't need this. I deserve more." Without ego, you stay trapped. You chase what breaks you. You romanticize pain and call it love. But ego doesn't chase, it attracts. Ego doesn't beg, it chooses. Ego doesn't cling, it releases. That's real power. You see, ego brings you back to yourself. Every time you get lost in others, every time you get caught in the chaos of the world, ego reminds you of return. Come back to the one who matters, you. Not in a selfish way, in a responsible way, because when you operate from ego, you stop depending on others for validation. You stop waiting for people to choose you. You stop needing constant reminders that you're worthy. The more you evolve, the more ego becomes necessary, because the higher you rise, the more people will try to pull you down. They won't understand your boundaries. They'll call your standards too high. But ego doesn't explain. Ego doesn't soften just to be liked. Ego protects what you've built. It protects your energy, your mind, your peace. You must understand the ego is not loud. It is calm. It is precise. It doesn't argue. It exits. It doesn't beg. It lets go. That's the new strength. The ability to say no with peace in your heart. The ability to end a connection without war. That only comes when ego is awake and balanced. Because without ego, you'll keep returning to what hurt you. You'll keep proving your worth to people who are committed to misunderstanding you. So stop listening to those who tell you to let go of your ego. That advice is incomplete. Let go of your arrogance. Let go of your insecurity, but keep your ego. Strengthen your ego, because a strong ego builds a strong love, a strong life. You will stop settling. You will stop shrinking. You will stop asking for permission. That is how greatness is born. Sometimes the most spiritual thing you can do is walk away. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is protect your time. And sometimes the most important thing you can do is say, "As I choose myself now." That's ego speaking. That's your soul reclaiming itself. And the world will not understand it. But that's okay, because you're not here to be understood. You're here to become unstoppable. This is your moment to rise, to stop hiding your power, to stop waiting for validation. Build your ego like a fortress, not to keep love out, but to keep weakness out. Keep confusion out, keep doubt out. This is not about being better than anyone. It's about never being less than who you truly are. Remember, this ego is not the chain. Ego is the key to unlock your strength, the key to unlock your potential, the key to becoming the version of you that no longer breaks under pressure, but sharpens in it. The old you survived, but the new you with ego will conquer. Most people don't realize this. But every time you avoid conflict, every time you stay silent to keep the peace, every time you tolerate something that doesn't sit right with your soul, you are not being humble. You are weakening your ego. And when the ego is weak, your entire foundation begins to crumble, because it is the ego that draws the line. It is the ego that says enough. It is the ego that keeps you from being used, ignored, forgotten. You want to become someone powerful, someone respected. Then stop treating ego like a villain. Start treating it like a weapon, because in this world, no one hands you respect. You command it. And that command, it comes from the presence of ego, not the ego that brags, not the one that competes, but the one that says, "I will not be broken. I will not be reduced. I will not be made small for the comfort of others." There are moments in life where only ego can save you. When everything feels like it's slipping, when people cross your boundaries again and again, when you keep giving and they keep taking. In those moments, if your ego is asleep, you will keep suffering. You'll keep explaining yourself. You'll keep waiting for someone to see your worth. But if ego is awake, truly awake, you'll rise. You'll cut ties. You'll stop bleeding for those who wouldn't even offer you a bandage. Ego gives you the courage to say, "This chapter is done," even when it hurts, even when it's scary, because growth isn't comfortable. Becoming greater doesn't come with applause. It comes with resistance. It comes with isolation. And only ego can carry you through that fire. Only ego can whisper in your darkest moment, "You're not done. You're just getting started." The truth is, most people are afraid of ego because they've never met a version of themselves that can handle it. They think ego makes them selfish, but selfish is choosing peace when chaos knocks. Selfish is choosing yourself after years of self-neglect. No, that's not selfish. That's survival. That's healing. That's clarity. Ego is not the sickness. Ego is the medicine. To become someone unshakable, you must build an ego that doesn't need to be loud to be powerful. A quiet ego, a focused ego, one that doesn't need the spotlight, but never lets itself be walked over. One that can walk away from anything that no longer aligns. That is real greatness. That is when you start leading your life instead of being led. Ego also gives you vision. Without it, you only see the present. But ego pulls your eyes to the future. It says you were not born for this smallness. You were not created for mediocrity. And when you listen to that voice, you begin to take action. You stop waiting. You stop dreaming. You begin building. You begin sharpening. You begin walking toward that next version of you, and you do not apologize for it. Every time you hold yourself back to make others comfortable, your ego dies a little. Every time you say yes when you mean no, your ego shrinks. And over time, so do you. And one day, you wake up and wonder why you feel empty, why you feel invisible. It's because the part of you that was meant to protect you, the ego, was silenced for too long. You need to remember who you are. You need to rebuild the fire. You need to stop mistaking comfort for peace. Peace doesn't come from avoiding tension. Peace comes from alignment, from knowing you are living truthfully, honestly, authentically, and that only happens when ego is in its rightful place, front line, not backstage. There's nothing wrong with being proud of your growth. There's nothing wrong with knowing your worth. There's nothing wrong with saying, I am not the same person I was 6 months ago. I've healed, I've fought, I've survived, and now I will rise. That's ego. That's strength. That's transformation. Let others call it arrogance. Let them call it ego. Let them misunderstand it. What matters is what you call it. You call it self-respect. You call it growth. You call it stepping into your power. Because if you keep letting people define what's too much about you, you will always be not enough in your own life. The world will never fully accept a strong person. But that is not your job. Your job is not to be understood. Your job is to evolve. Your job is to reach your edge and then push past it and the force that allows that ego. So rise with it, not above others, but above your old self. Step into the room like you belong. Speak like your voice matters. Decide like your future depends on it. That is the energy of someone who knows the value of their ego. And when you carry that energy, you don't need to prove anything. You are the proof. If you want to become something greater, something that commands strength, not just on the outside, but deep within, you have to stop treating your ego like it's the enemy. This world is not soft. Life doesn't ask if you're ready. It just comes. And if you are not centered, if you are not rooted in your power, you will break. You will collapse every time pressure touches your life. That's why the ego must not be destroyed. It must be trained. Ego is not your weakness. It's your compass. It tells you what you will allow and what you will not tolerate. It defines the lines that no one can cross, not even yourself. When you have no ego, you become a slave to opinions. You bend, you fold, you mold yourself into what the world wants you to be. But with ego, true, strong, mature ego, you choose who you become. You are not a reaction. You are a decision. A person with no ego keeps questioning their worth. A person with ego walks with clarity. They don't need validation. They validate themselves through action, through mastery, through presence. And when they enter a space, you feel them. Not because they're loud, but because they're certain. That certainty comes from the ego. That is the energy you must train. Because life is not waiting for the humble man to arrive. It moves for the grounded man. The one who knows who he is and where he's going. When you lack ego, you follow everything blindly. But when ego is alive inside you, you begin to question. You begin to set standards. You begin to say, this is not for me. And those words have power, not because of pride, but because of vision. Your ego keeps you aligned. It protects your growth. It reminds you that being liked by everyone is not success. Being respected by yourself is. There are moments in life where silence destroys you. When you keep allowing things because you're afraid of being seen as too much. You hide your voice, your ideas, your desires. But the truth is, if your ego was awake, you would never shrink like that. You would speak, you would act. You would shift your entire life with one sentence of, for I am not available for this anymore. People keep asking how to become confident. The answer is simple: build your ego, not through arrogance, not through comparison. Build it through discipline. Build it through keeping promises to yourself. Build it through facing discomfort and doing what others refuse to do. Every time you choose the hard path that leads to your evolution, your ego grows stronger. It becomes your armor. And when the time comes to face something painful, something real you don't break, you rise. The reason many never reach greatness is because they killed the part of them that was designed to fight. They buried their ego under guilt, under shame, under the fear of judgment. And now they walk like ghosts, alive but not awake. Don't let that be your story. Let your ego rise. Let it fuel your hunger. Let it push you into the cold when everyone else stays warm. That's how you become great, not by hiding, not by playing small, but by becoming undeniable. You must also stop apologizing for your ambition. There's nothing wrong with wanting more. There's nothing wrong with knowing you deserve better. That voice in you, the one that says, I was made for more than this, that is the ego speaking. And when you silence it, you settle. You call average your home. But when you listen, really listen, you begin to create a life that reflects your inner fire, not your outer fear. The ego is the guardian of your destiny, but it must be trained. It must be disciplined. Left wild, it becomes arrogance. Left starving, it becomes the depression. But trained, it becomes power. It becomes silence that doesn't beg, presence that doesn't need noise, focus that doesn't drift. This is not theory. This is real. Every great warrior, every wise teacher, every unstoppable human you admire, they all have one thing in common, an ego that serves their higher self. So stop running from it. Sit with it. Understand it. Give it responsibility. Tell it, we are going somewhere. You are not here to destroy. You are here to protect, to build, to lead. And once your ego accepts that role, you become unshakable. This journey is not about becoming someone new. It's about uncovering who you were before you were told to dim your light, before the world shamed your fire. That version of you is still there, underneath the layers of silence, doubt, and fear. And the key to reaching him is ego. So train it, feed it truth, teach it focus, and then let it walk with you, not in front, not behind, but beside you, as your sword, as your shield, as your reminder that this life was never meant to be survived. It was meant to be claimed. And only those with ego, calm, centered, powerful ego can do that. This is how you become greater, not by rejecting who you are, but by mastering it.